Chapter 7. The day carried on pretty smoothly, and boringly, but I suppose there were two sides to being CEO of Lunar Corporation. One was fighting werewolves to protect what was mine, and the other was signing papers and reading various performance reports. Mia had explained that I didn't really need to implement anything this week. It was more of a taster session for what I'd have to do in the near future. But this was all about getting me acclimated and comfortable in my role. Still, that didn't mean it couldn't be boring as hell. I rested my chin in my hands as my eyes scanned the page robotically. I was getting drowsy, which honestly wasn't a surprise considering I'd been sitting here all morning. But suddenly my office phone rang loudly, and the sound snapped me out of my tunnel vision on a particularly tedious report. I picked up within seconds and scrambled to press the phone to my ear. "Josh, I've got Victor Montgomery on line 2 for you," Mia's voice said down the line. "It's urgent." "All right, thanks, Mia," I said before pressing the button for line 2. The line rang for a few seconds before I heard Victor clear his throat. "Josh, I'm afraid I have some rather distressing news," he said plainly. "Good morning to you too, Victor." I joked to try and lighten the mood, but Victor didn't respond. "What news?" "One of our warehouses has been compromised," the chairman said. "We have reason to believe it is the same pack behind all the other attacks." "What? Why the hell wasn't I notified?" I demanded. I couldn't hold it back. I hadn't taken my aggression regulators today, and quite frankly, I was pissed I was probably the last person to find out. "I apologize for the delay in informing you, Josh, but unfortunately the wolves attacking killed the majority of our security team before they could deliver proper communication," Victor explained. "We have only just received this information ourselves." "They killed our guards?" I growled and squeezed my fist in anger. Innocent men. They had killed the innocent men that I had wanted to be hired for extra protection. I could feel my blood pumping through my veins and rushing to my head, and I squeezed my fists tighter only to hiss as I felt my claws puncture the flesh of my hand. 10 men, the board member informed me. 3 have gone no contact. We have to assume the worst. "Where is this warehouse?" I managed to get out through gritted teeth. "Newark," Victor said with a sigh. "If you are intending to go, I will send the car to take you, but we've already got more security en route." "Do it," I said as I stood from my desk. "I'm going now, and I'm going to put a stop to this." "As you wish, sir," the chairman said. "I'll call Roland and tell him to meet you out front." But I wouldn't hold out hope. They've been there for quite some time now. I wouldn't be surprised if they've already fled. "Got it, thanks." I huffed and slammed the phone back down. I tried to take a few deep breaths, but it was pointless. I was fueled by a rage that wouldn't be going away anytime soon, but I'd need that rage if I was gonna get rid of these sons of bitches. "I'm going to the warehouse," I said to Mia as I practically bolted out of my office door and headed for the elevator. "Wait, I'm coming with you," the Omega said as she shot up from her chair. "I heard everything." "No, Mia, I need you to stay here," I said over my shoulder. I couldn't let her get hurt, and staying here was the safest option. I knew she could handle herself, but ever since I'd found out she was an Omega, I felt even more protective of her. On the one hand, I didn't want to shelter her and become exactly what she was. Afraid of someone who purposefully treated her differently and thought she wasn't capable. But I knew I'd be able to concentrate better if she was out of harm's way. "Josh, I can handle myself, you know I can," the blonde protested just as I expected, and I could hear her heels clacking against the floor as she rushed to catch up to me. "You promised me that telling you the truth wouldn't change anything." "I know, but then let me come with you," she pleaded as she reached my side. "I can help. And if the numbers are anything like the other day, then you'll need all the help you can get. Especially if we get there before the other guards do." "But what if you get hurt?" I asked and let my true fear show. If she got hurt under my watch, then I didn't know what I'd do. I'd gone berserk just from them holding her back. What would I do if she actually got injured by one of the other wolves? Mia slowly walked in front of me and reached for my hands, which were still trembling from rage. "Josh, I know you're worried about me, and I appreciate it, I do," Mia said. "But you cannot look down on me just because I'm an Omega. I'm strong. I have to be strong if I'm going to survive in our world. And I'm not going to let you down." Her green eyes stared pleadingly up into my dark brown ones, and she squeezed my shaking hands in desperation. If anything, her sticking up for herself like this only made me respect her even more, and I could see there was a fire behind her eyes I couldn't put out. Plus it was really hot. She was just like me, fierce and strong and desperate to protect what was ours. And who would I be to try and change that? All right, I said with a long exhale. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for trying to hold you back. Don't apologize, the blonde reassured me and squeezed my hands. It shows you care. If we're gonna do this though, I need you to promise me that if it gets too dangerous you'll get out of there, I said as I firmly stared into her eyes. The other guards will be there to back me up if it gets out of hand, but I need you to be safe. Josh, if you get hurt or worse, I don't know what I'd do, I admitted. So I need to know that if it comes down to it you'll get out of there. But what about you? Mia frowned. I'm a supreme alpha, right? I said with a weak grin. I think that's gotta count for something. All right, Josh, the Omega said with a sigh. But if you get hurt, I'll whoop your ass myself. Sounds like a deal. I laughed and pulled her by her hand toward the elevator. Roland was waiting for us outside just like Victor had said, and we quickly climbed into the back seat. Step on it, Roland, I said as I buckled myself in. We need to get to the warehouse ASAP. Of course, sir, our driver said before flooring it. I had no idea how long he'd been working at Lunar Corporation, but this guy knew the streets of New York like the back of his hand. He expertly wove in and out of traffic, and we hightailed it across the bridge and toward Newark within 18 minutes. When we finally arrived at the warehouse, I was practically shaking with adrenaline. I just hoped it wasn't too late for the other security guards. Drive around the block, we'll call you when we're done, I said as I scrambled out of the car. I don't want you getting caught in the crossfire if any of those bastards come running out. Thank you, sir, Roland said politely. And if you need backup, just call. My eyes widened in surprise as Roland pulled down his black aviators, and his eyes flashed a bright yellow. He was a beta. No wonder they had him driving me everywhere. Sure thing. I nodded. Thanks, Roland. Of course, Roland said as he pushed his aviators back up his nose. Good luck and hunt well. I waved the driver off as he sped out of the parking lot leading to the main entrance of the warehouse. The place was huge and stuck out like a gray thumb. The security outposts Roland had driven us through were deserted, and the barrier that would usually stop traffic coming in had been ripped off and thrown to the side. What's the plan here, Josh? Mia whispered as we stalked closer to the main entrance that had been busted in. If these guys are tearing up the joint, then they're gonna be pretty distracted, I muttered. I want you to try and find the injured security guards. I'm gonna face the pack and try to talk to them. You wanna talk to them again? The Omega asked in a surprised tone. One warning is enough, surely. These guys are forced to follow orders, right? It doesn't seem fair for me to just go in guns blazing without giving them a chance. Even if their alpha has basically declared war, I want to give them a chance. One more and that's it. All right, Mia agreed reluctantly. But just be careful, okay? Something like kindness is easily taken advantage of in our world. Got it. I nodded. Try and find a side entrance. I'm going to go in this way and distract them. Okay, Mia said breathlessly. Be safe. You too, I said, and I fought back my natural instinct to grab Mia and keep her glued to my side. Instead, I carefully stepped over the broken down door and I made sure I didn't make any sound that would prematurely alert the pack to my presence. Then I snuck over toward one of the huge shelving units that allowed me a glimpse into the center of the room, which was the main pit of all the destruction. Around 15 wolves were ripping up box after box like their lives depended on it. The snarls that left their mouths were wild and feral, and their claws lashed out at incredible speed. I wasn't surprised they were still on their mission of destruction given how fast Roland had driven us here. This was going to be a hard fight if they didn't back down, but I was ready. Needed to be ready. I was the CEO of this company and I needed to protect it at any cost. I glanced around to check if there were any more wolves, and I spotted Mia sneaking along the second floor balcony, so she must have found a back entrance without alerting the wolves in their animalistic craze. She blended into the shadows, and even with my enhanced vision it was hard to pin her down because of how fluid her movements were. Her bright blue eyes flashed as they met mine, and she gave me a reassuring nod. She was safe. She was okay. Now I had to do my part. The extra security Victor had sent clearly hadn't arrived yet, so it would be down to me to either hold them off until they got here, or I could try and pick off as many of them as I could without the extra backup. Hey! I called out in a bellowing voice as I stepped out from behind the shelving unit. Every single werewolf snapped their heads over to me and paused in their destruction of my product. They all immediately bared their fangs and prowled forward on all fours, and their eyes glowed bright yellow as they glared at me. Except they weren't all yellow. One pair of eyes were bright red like a blood moon, and they stared down at me from atop a huge crate in the center of the room. There he is, the red-eyed wolf cooed in a gravelly voice that had a thick Brooklyn accent. He was huge, almost as big as I was in my elite wolf form, I'd wager. His shoulders were broad, and his stature would be intimidating to anyone who wasn't an alpha. This was the alpha of the pack. I've been looking forward to meeting the new CEO of Lunar Corporation. He said the name like it was poison on his tongue, and I growled unwillingly. So you're the asshole fucking with my shit? I scoffed as I stepped further into the opening that was surrounded by broken bottles, pills, and torn cardboard. It was a mess, and I didn't even want to think about how much stock we'd lost. The large alpha chuckled darkly and jumped down from his crate with his hairy arms held out. His blood-red eyes glimmered in the spotlights shining down from the rafters, and I could see a malice in them that sent a shiver down my spine. The bridge of his nose was wider and flatter than the other wolves I'd seen, and his eyes seemed sunken in and overshadowed by his thick brow. His hair was dark brown and slicked back from his wide face, and his sideburns were thick and bushy just like the hair on his arms. The alpha wore a black tank top and loose green camo pants but had nothing on his feet. Silver chains hung from his hairy neck, and as he bared his teeth at me, I could see he had silver grills on every tooth except his canines. He wasn't a supreme alpha, or at least he hadn't shifted into that elite form yet, but something told me that if he was a supreme, this guy would take any opportunity to show off. That's me, he said with a wide grin. The name's Drake, and it would seem you've caught us at a bad time. You killed my guards, I snarled. I think you've caught me at a bad time. I started to shift on instinct, like some part deep inside of me knew I needed to protect myself. I held back a groan as I felt my limbs stretch and my fangs and claws sprouted from my body. Surprisingly, my dad's suit didn't rip or tear. It stretched with my growing size, and I felt a little bit of relief at it not being ruined. But that was the least of my worries. I could feel the rage that had overpowered my body back at the office start to barrel through me again, and I hunched over a little as I started to growl. Well, would you look at that, Drake said in a mocking tone. You really are a supreme alpha. I haven't had the pleasure of dealing with one of you for a long time. Pleasure's one word for it, I spat. Why the hell are you so hellbent on attacking my company? Your company? The alpha laughed. Settling so quickly into your father's shoes. Don't you dare talk about my father, I seethed. I take it that's still a sensitive subject, he said with a patronizing pout. My sincere condolences for your loss. Tell me why you're doing this, I managed to spit out through gritted teeth. And why you gave my parents so much hell. It's simple, Joshua, Drake said as he took a step toward me. Your drugs need to go. Why can't you just choose not to use them? I asked. No one's forcing them down your goddamn throat. You're right, the bold alpha agreed. But Lunar Corporation is part of a much bigger problem. The fact your company pumps out drugs that go against our nature is diabolical, and it needs to stop. Oh please. I rolled my eyes. Enough about this against our nature crap. Those drugs help wolves in ways you could never understand. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Drake asked coolly, but I could see his eye twitch. You're an alpha, I pointed out. You don't have to worry about anything. You can be exactly who you want to be without a second thought. But what about omegas? What happens if they don't have access to sense suppressants? Do they just have to live their lives in fear? You think I care about omegas? The red-eyed bastard scoffed. They're just breeding bitches, nothing more. I watched as some of the female members of his pack briefly looked up at him, and their low-hung tails straightened for a moment before their eyes snapped back up to me. You've got a lot to learn, little wolf, Drake tooted. So you're as arrogant as I thought, got it. I nodded my head. Somehow I guessed you were narrow-minded before I even walked through those busted doors. It's good to have a sense of humor, the alpha hummed. Especially when you're staring into the jaws of defeat. I came here to talk to you to get you to stop, I said firmly. I didn't come here to be defeated. So much to learn, such little time, Drake sighed. It's a shame your parents didn't tell you about who you really were sooner. Maybe then you would have stood a chance. With that, Drake stepped back and his pack started to circle me. If they'd have told you sooner, then you would have had time to make yourself a pack, he continued. Because as powerful as we are, every alpha needs a pack. Drake's smirk set me on edge, and his wolves slowly started to prowl closer. I've got other guards on their way right now, I said as confidently as I could. Guards aren't a pack, Drake scoffed. And if they're as shit at fighting as the other old bastards you had guarding this place, then I doubt they'll be much hassle. So this is how you want to play it, huh? I quipped. You're gonna let your pack die, and for what? Who said anything about my pack dying? The red-eyed alpha asked. You're outnumbered, Joshua. Supreme alpha or not, the odds are against you. Then Drake clenched his fist out in front of him, and the pack honed in on command. I whipped around and sliced 3 of the closest wolves with my claws. They yelped as my sharp nails tore into their flesh, and they staggered back into one of the colossal shelving units. Another beta pounced on me and managed to cling onto my back, but I didn't stumble. I was a goddamn powerhouse, an immovable object, and the weak beta, who was trying to claw at my chest from behind, wasn't going to stop me. I reached behind me and dug my nails into the flesh of his back, which made the male beta howl in pain. Then I pulled him forward, flipped him off me, and slammed him into the concrete floor. He wheezed at the impact, and his bright yellow eyes burned brighter for a moment before they faded back into their original color and closed. But I had no time to dwell on the fact that I'd killed yet another person. Instead, I didn't hold back my instincts that were sending me into overdrive. A growl began to rumble deep in my chest as my blood started to boil, and I let out a roar that almost tore my throat up. The sheer intensity of it rattled the remaining boxes on the nearby shelves, and the betas instinctively cowered away from me. Fight him, Drake demanded. Don't you dare fucking cower from him. Some of the betas remained hunched and afraid, but 3 pushed past their fear and boldly squared their shoulders and raised their tails high. I snarled, which made them flinch, but they started to advance regardless. The biggest one, a lumberjack-looking guy who was wearing a flannel shirt and cargo shorts, swung for my head, but I ducked just in time. Then I kicked out my long leg and swung for his feet, and I sent him toppling to the ground with a yelp. The other 2 pounced simultaneously, and together they managed to shove my body to the ground. I held up my arm to protect my head and felt one of them claw right through my forearm, but I didn't feel any pain. Adrenaline was pumping through me, and it sent me into a craze. My hand blindly fumbled for any piece of debris I could use to my advantage. While I roared up into the 2 betas' faces, spit flew out of my mouth and hit them square in the face, which made them recoil and gave me just enough room to reach a little further. I felt hardwood from one of the destroyed crates with my palm, and I slammed it into the head of the beta on the left side. He howled as the wood splintered and penetrated his skull, so I hit him again and drove the wood further into his head as I wielded the board like a goddamn hammer. He spluttered on a mouthful of blood before falling limp at my side as the splinter finally hit his brain. The other beta straddling me looked at his dead comrade in horror, before his eyes trailed to my face. My hands were around his neck before I knew it, and I squeezed as hard as I could. His yellow eyes bulged sickeningly, and I thought they were gonna pop out of his head as I kept squeezing. His purple face gasped for breath as he desperately clawed at my hands before I felt the muscles in his neck finally squish between my fingers. I threw his lifeless body to the side like it was nothing before standing to my full height, and I noticed I was now dripping in beta blood. Drake's red eyes were wide in surprise, but he made no move to attack me. Instead, a female beta with a buzzed head roared in anger and charged for me blindly. As soon as she was close enough, I grabbed her arm and twisted until I heard the bone snap in half. She wailed as blood oozed from the wound, and white bone protruded out of her arm, but I didn't hold back. I couldn't hold back. So I reached for her other arm and snapped that too, like it was nothing more than a twig. She crumpled to the floor and cradled her arms, and I booted her face as hard as I could. The beta flew back from the impact, and she landed lifeless and still on the floor. Becky! Another male beta yelled in horror. You bastard! The shocked beta's blind rage made him an easy target, and I met him halfway. As he started to sprint toward me, my fist met his face and punctured right through the bones of his skull. Then, I yanked his caved-in head off my hand and kicked him to the ground. I was pissed, and I was unstoppable. The Supreme Alpha was dominating my every thought and every movement, and I was going to let it do whatever the hell it wanted. Suddenly, Mia slammed down onto the crate Drake had been standing on with her hackles up and tail raised high. His attention turned from me to her, and his face went slack in surprise. The blonde roared at Drake, who was standing in shock at the sight of an Omega, who didn't bow down at his feet, and he only just barely managed to dodge out of her way as she leaped down to where he'd just been standing. The blonde wasted no time in attacking the remaining betas who were still cowering in the shadows. They put up the best fight as they could given what they just witnessed me do to their friends, but we had to end this sooner rather than later. I tried not to think about Mia. I knew she could handle herself. Besides, I had tunnel vision right now whether I wanted it or not, and my sights were set on Drake. The Alpha was on all fours on the ground after jumping out of the way of Mia. He snarled up at me as I neared, but I could smell the hint of fear on him. Let out a low grumbling sound as I stalked closer, and I flexed my clawed hands at my side. This was my chance. This was where I could put an end to it all. But Drake suddenly sprang off the ground and lunged for me, and it was like the whole thing happened in slow motion. One moment I could see his snarling face and long claws about to smash directly into me, and the next I was ducking away from his catapulting body and grabbing the back of his neck. Drake yowled as I slammed my knee up into his stomach and kept a death grip on his neck to stop him from moving. The Alpha grabbed hold of my arm and flipped me over, which released him from my grip. I scrambled up just in time to avoid his bare foot slamming into my face, and I swiped at his feet with my claws. He growled as I managed to slice his Achilles tendon, and he unwillingly collapsed onto one knee. I grabbed a hold of his head and brought my fist down onto his wide face. His head whipped to the side and he spat out a mix of blood and silver grill, but before he could recover I hit him again. Gah! He shouted and dug his nails into my thighs. You motherfucker! I gritted my teeth at the pain, but I got another hit in which made the bleeding Alpha release me. I stumbled back at the release on my thighs, and Drake used the opportunity to scramble away from me. Enough, he roared. The remaining betas pulled back and cowered on the floor as they awaited their leader's command. Mia snarled as the beta she was throttling yanked herself away, and the blonde Omega slowly came to stand at my side. This isn't over. The Alpha seethed and wiped his bloody lip with his arm. Before I even had a chance to reach for him, the large Alpha was sprinting on all fours deeper into the warehouse. I went to chase after him, but Mia put her hand on my arm. Josh, don't, she said breathlessly as she started to shift back into her human form. Why not? I shouted angrily. We have him. Listen to yourself, you're too fired up, she pleaded. You're in a rage, and if you go after him and out in the open, you'll draw attention we don't need. Right now. She was right. I wasn't myself. I had given in to that primal side within me and let it take charge. Blood coated my body and my hands, and I felt it sticking to my exposed skin like sludge. So I took a deep breath, focused hard, and could feel myself start to slowly shift back to my normal human form. I shrunk down a few inches until I was back to my regular height, and then I sighed as I looked at the devastation around me, but it was necessary. I gave Drake a chance and he spat it back in my face. This was war. As soon as I was back in my human form and my claws slid back into my fingernails, I felt a sudden urge to make sure Mia was okay. Whatever rage I had been in before must have blocked my instincts, because now I couldn't physically stop myself from rushing to her side and looking her over. Are you all right? I asked. I held her shoulders as my eyes scanned her body for any sign of injury, and I sniffed around her neck to see if I could smell any blood or pain on her. I'm fine, Josh, Mia said with a light chuckle. Really, I'm okay. I reluctantly stopped sniffing her after I could only make out the salty scent of sweat and that alluring smell that was dulled down, but always present. Are you sure? I asked as I looked deep into her eyes to make sure she wasn't lying. I'm sure, the blonde said with a small smile. Before I could respond, I heard a whine from somewhere among the destruction, which made me whip around and instinctively push Mia behind me. My ears perked up, and I sniffed the air as I tried to make out where it was coming from. The rich scent of blood filled my nose, and I could also smell fear. I didn't know how to describe it, but it was like as soon as it hit my nose I got a taste of that emotion, like a pit in my stomach that tried to cripple me. Mia, I whispered to the blonde, and I gestured with my hand for her to follow me. We both carefully slinked toward the noise, and I discovered it was coming from a crate that had fallen down from one of the shelves. It moved a little, as whatever was beneath it tried to push it off themselves, but as I got closer, the smell of blood got stronger. Whoever the scent belonged to was weak, and they were trapped. Mia and I rounded the crate at the same time, and the Omega gasped at the recognizable face staring up at us in fear. It was Emily, the barista from the coffee shop we tracked the scent to yesterday. Even in her wolf form I could recognize her. Her cherry-red hair was splayed out on the cement floor, and it blended into the pool of blood coming out of her. She squirmed in a desperate attempt to free herself, only to yelp in pain. The scent of her blood was stronger than ever and almost made me retch, but I knelt down beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder to still her movement. The redhead's yellow eyes snapped to me, and I could see the pure fear behind them. Her breath was labored and ragged, and she attempted to yank her shoulder away from me only to groan in agony again. I held my hands up as a sign that I wasn't gonna hurt her. Her pack had abandoned her and left her for dead, and I hadn't seen her during the fight. Maybe she was just another pawn like the woman I'd let go back at the Lunar Corp warehouse. The fact she'd been so on edge when we had gone into the coffee shop made sense. They must have known each other, and the wolf I'd let go probably told her about me and Mia. Tears shone in Emily's eyes as I put my hands under the crate like she expected me to finish the job and crush her with its weight. Instead I hauled the crate off her with a growl and chucked it to the other side of the room. The crate slammed into the ground and shattered on impact, but when I turned back around, Emily was gone, and I turned again just in time to see her lingering in the doorway leading to the main entrance. She panted as she clutched her wounds, and her eyes were wild with something I couldn't quite place. I inhaled deeply, and I could still smell her fear but also gratitude washed over me like a warm rain in summer, and I nodded my head again to show her it was okay for her to go. Emily didn't linger a minute longer and bolted out of the door as fast as her wounds would allow her. I can't believe it, Mia said as she came to stand at my side. That whole time we were in that coffee shop, she was one of Drake's pack. I know, I sighed. No wonder she was giving us death glares, huh? Why'd you let her go? The blonde asked. Her pack left her behind. I shrugged, and I could smell fear on her. Plus, she was injured, so she wasn't a threat anymore. What would be the point in killing her? You're a good alpha, Josh, Mia said and rested a gentle hand on my shoulder. There's not many out there who would even think twice about killing her. I guess that's one of the good things to come out of me being human for so long, I mused. I'm not as brutal. I think you're right, Mia hummed with a smile and nodded her head in agreement. And I'm glad. I smiled and went to wrap my arm around her shoulder only to wince at a sharp pain in my arm. I looked down and saw there was a gash in my forearm that I hadn't really realized the betas had inflicted when we were fighting. It had torn right through my suit blazer and shirt, and the wound was already weeping. Shit! I hissed as I inspected the cut and saw how deep it was. Muscle and tendon looked back at me, and I had to swallow my own bile at the sight of it. That's pretty deep, Mia said as she gently grabbed my arm. But as an alpha, you have an accelerated healing ability faster than any wolf. So this will go away soon? I asked and kept my gaze away from the wound. Yeah, it shouldn't take long for it to heal, the blonde reassured me. You'll be okay. We should really get the security guards back to our infirmary back at Lunar Corporation though. We have an infirmary? I asked in surprise. Yeah, it's kinda needed, the Omega explained. If betas rocked up to a normal hospital and slowly started stitching themselves back together, it would make a few headlines. So how come they need an infirmary at all? I asked as we started to walk to the staircase leading up to the second floor where the security guards were. Betas don't heal as fast as alphas, Mia said. Werewolves have a natural immunity to things like infections and some poisons, but betas have a much weaker immunity to those things than alphas. So they have to treat their wounds more like a human? I asked as I started to understand the complexities a little better. Yes, Mia nodded. Lunar Corporation produces much stronger painkillers for injured betas to help with the recovery process. They should be all healed up within a week, but it can still be pretty rough for them. I see, I said. Stomping feet approaching made us both freeze on the staircase, and I felt my claws retract. Mr. St. James? I heard a voice call out my name. I peered over the balcony and could see the extra security guards that Victor had sent start filing into the room and surveying the damage. We're up here, I called back. Did you find any stragglers? We're securing the perimeter, one of them informed me. All right, be careful, these guys aren't messing around. I warned them. We will be, sir, he said, and the guards filed off into the warehouse on all fours, sniffing for any sense they could pick up that still lingered. What kind of shape did you find the guards in? I asked as we started making our way up the stairs again. See for yourself, the blonde Omega said and gestured for me to continue up the stairs first. As I stepped onto the metal platform leading down to one of the security outposts on the second floor, I could see 3 wounded security guards leaning up against the wall. I could smell the blood seeping from their wounds, as well as the stench of fear, but as soon as I stepped into their line of sight, it dulled down. Hey, we're gonna get you guys out of here, I said to the guards who looked up at us in gratitude. They're all gone, one of the more injured guards asked in a trembling voice. Yeah, they're all gone. I nodded. And I'm not gonna let them do something like this again. You have my word. I'm sure you'll stick to your word, kid, but I think I'm about ready to retire. One of the older-looking guards groaned as he clutched his side. You got a ride? Yeah, we'll take care of you, don't worry, I said before I turned to my assistant. Mia, give Roland a call and see if he can get another car out here for us. Sure thing, the blonde said and pulled out her phone. Can any of you walk? I asked as I surveyed the guards for the most severe injuries. 2 of them had superficial injuries like scrapes and claw marks that had ripped through their blue security shirts. But the older guard looked the worst. His torn blue shirt was slowly becoming red in various places where he had been slashed, and his face was extremely pale. I can walk, the older man said as he attempted to push himself off the ground only to collapse back down again. No, you can't, I said as I reached down and hauled him into my arms, and I was still surprised by how light he felt. How about the rest of you? I can walk, the guard closest to Mia said, and he successfully managed to pick himself off the floor with the help of the metal railing. Me too, the one beside him said and followed suit. All right, let's get the hell out of here, I said before I started to lead the way back down the stairs and out to the parking lot. Roland's on his way, Mia said as she followed behind us, and she wrapped one of the limping security guard's arms around her shoulder to help him walk. I pushed down the instinctual jealousy I suddenly felt at the sight, since I knew she was just trying to help, and I focused my attention on the injured guard in my arms who was clinging onto my shoulders for dear life. And the other car? I asked. About 10 minutes out, she explained. Cleanup's coming too, as well as Collins. Collins? I asked with a groan. Why the hell is he coming out here? To see how much product we've lost, Mia said. He's gonna be the one to deliver the blow about the financial repercussions. Great. I sighed and held back a wince as I felt the wound on my arm ooze. I wasn't gonna complain about that though. Not when I had an injured beta in my arms who wasn't gonna be able to heal for at least a week. We exited out of the dilapidated main entrance, and I could pick up Emily's scent as we left. As I wasn't concentrating on it though, it blew away with the light breeze, but we'd know where we could find her now anyway. Roland pulled up moments after we stepped into the open, and I walked as quickly as I could to the car without hurting the security guard anymore. Our driver rushed out as soon as he saw the wounded, and he pulled open the passenger door for me to place the old guard into the back seat. Thank you, the older man said as I buckled him in. You saved our lives. Back there, sir. Both of you. You should never have had to go through that, I said. And I'm sorry. We know what we signed up for, the guard argued with a shake of his head. Don't apologize. What's your name? I asked while Mia and Roland helped the other 2 guards into the car. Clive Wilcox, sir, he said politely. I worked with your father a lot. I know he'd be proud as hell to see his son doing what you did today. That means a lot, Clive, I said with a small smile. Rest up, and I'll see what I can do about that retirement. Thank you, sir, he said with teary eyes. Hunt well. I shut the passenger door and gave Roland a nod of thanks before he climbed back into the driver's seat and drove off back to Lunar Corp. The others told me Clive held them off for as long as he could, Mia said as she stood beside me and rested her head against my shoulder. They're all brave men, I commented. The others didn't deserve to die. Because of goddamn pills. You're right, they didn't, the blonde sighed. So what do we do now? Now we head back and update the board, and then we'll go find the only lead. We've got on Drake, I said with determination. I wasn't gonna let another innocent person get hurt because of this asshole. He'd proven today that he wasn't gonna back down, and he had no regard for anyone's life or livelihood apart from his own. And what lead is that? Mia asked. Emily, I said. We go and find Chapter 8. Another car pulled up shortly after Roland hightailed it out of the parking lot and Mia and I clambered in. The entire journey was spent in complete silence, but to be fair, the driver probably didn't even know what to say. We looked like we'd been dragged through a hedge backward, especially considering my suit was a little torn up, and I was covered in blood. Luckily, my mom's dress had remained intact on Mia, so that was one less tailoring job I need to get done. It still pissed me off that those betas had managed to rip the fabric of my suit though. It was kind of funny how I was more concerned about my dad's suit than the big gash in my arm, but that would heal. My dad's suit, however durable it might be, wouldn't. We pulled into a private parking lot that was past a guarded outpost and led underground. The driver briefly explained this was where the majority of the company cars were kept, and if I were ever to get my own car, there was an allocated spot just for me. He also explained that, considering I was drenched in blood and we both looked like we'd been a victim of numerous crimes, it was probably best we didn't use the public entrance. So, Mia led the way to the elevator tucked away in the furthest corner of the parking lot and punched in the number for the 80th floor. I'm gonna go and clean myself up, Mia said as the elevator sped past the floors. If you need me in there, just text me. Sure thing, I said before I glanced down at my own disheveled appearance. Do you think the board will mind if I look like a complete wreck? I think they'll understand, the blonde chuckled. I can take your suit to a tailor at some point during the week. We have connections with werewolf-owned businesses to avoid suspicion. That makes sense, I agreed. Hey Mr. CEO, how did you get claw marks on your suit pants? Tripped and fell on a raccoon? Mia joked. We both chuckled to ourselves until the elevator dinged, and the metal doors slid open to reveal the hallway of the 80th floor. I'll see you later, Josh, the blonde said as I stepped out. Yeah, see you later, I said with a weak wave. Facing the board always made a little pit form in my stomach, but I was getting used to it. After all, I was technically their boss and they couldn't just chuck me out on the streets. Mia waved back and the doors slid closed. When I reached the floor I needed, I headed for the double doors at the end of the hallway, and as soon as I stepped into the meeting room, the three board members took a sharp inhale at the sight of me. Josh, Susan trailed off with wide eyes. Are you all right? I'm fine, I reassured as I pulled out the leather seat closest to me and threw myself down with a sigh. Exhausted but fine. We saw the footage, Lexi said with a pained look on her face. You fought well. More than well, Victor said as he shuffled closer to the desk. You fought fantastically. I've not seen that kind of strength in many years. Yeah, I sort of lost control a little bit back there, I admitted and rubbed the back of my head. It's why I didn't go after Drake. It can be hard to control the rage during your first few shifts, the gray-haired chairman said sympathetically. Most werewolves shift for the first time during childhood, giving them ample time to learn how to control their emotions. You, however, have not had the privilege of time on your side. That's an understatement, I joked half-heartedly. But let's get down to business. What kind of damage has Drake done? Collins is calculating our profit loss as we speak, Victor explained. But we are looking at around $500,000 in losses. Jesus Christ, I sighed and ran my hand through my hair. That's not good. A loss is a loss, but it could have been much worse, Victor said. $500,000. Million is a tiny drop in the ocean that is Lunar Corp, Joshua. It is more than manageable. More than manageable? There had been a point in my life I hadn't even dreamed of that kind of money, and now I was sitting in a room where it didn't even make these people bat an eye. So how do we make up for the shortfall? I asked as I sat up straighter. There's gotta be a way. Like I said, there really is no need to worry about this kind of money being lost right now, Victor said. If the attacks carry on, however, and we start looking at a serious loss, then we can have this conversation. I'd rather have it now, I said. There are a few options we could look at, Susan said. But Benjamin would be much better at explaining them to you. No, I'd rather hear it from you guys right now, I said and looked around the table. Very well. Victor cleared his throat. The first thing we could consider is cutting expenses. In other words, letting some employees go. No way, I immediately protested. We won't kick people out of a job because of Drake. It would be the best way to reduce our spending, in the worst-case scenario, Susan said. By removing only 10 employees, we would save a considerable amount of money. It won't be happening, I said firmly. What are the other options? We could consider taking on a new loan to tide us over until we can regain profit, Lexi suggested. As long as the attack stops soon, we'll be back on track to reach our original quota for next year. But it's a risk if we don't stop Drake soon, I sighed. Anything else? We could reevaluate our products and see if there is anything we can postpone production of based on sales, Victor added. It would only be temporary postponement, of course. I thought everything we made here was vital to werewolf livelihood, I said, with a frown. Postponing the production of anything, no matter how popular the product, could affect people's livelihoods. I chewed on my lip as I tried to think of anything that could help with future profit loss. Anything that wasn't firing innocent employees who needed a wage, or stopping the production of vital products. Take it out of my wage, I said as the idea suddenly came to me, and I knocked on the wood of the table. Whatever the profit loss is from now on, take it out of my paycheck. Joshua, you really don't need to. I'm well aware, I cut Susan off, and I don't care about that. I've got more money than I know what to do with, and I'm not going to fatten my pockets if the company starts suffering. The 3 board members shared a look of pleasant surprise with each other. Before Victor nodded. If that is what you wish, it can be arranged, but like I said, for now there will be no need, he replied. Regardless, it is a noble decision, and not one many CEOs would be so eager to make. Victor, I went from making $50,000 a year to millions in under a week, I snorted. Just take what's needed when it's needed, and don't call it noble. It's what I feel is best for the company. Very well. The chairman smirked with a hint of pride. We'll have Collins work it out with you should the need arise. Oh, and about Clive Wilcox, the security guard who got injured, I said. He wants to retire, and I promised that I'd see it through for him. Clive Wilcox is a valued employee, Victor mused. But after what he went through today, I think early retirement is something we can arrange. Great, I said with a relieved sigh. Was that all? There is one more problem you should be aware of, the chairman said, and shared a look of discomfort with the rest of the board. Drake is turning more and more people into wolves every day. He can do that? I asked in surprise. Only alphas can turn humans into wolves, Lexi explained. It's a painful process and not one that should be given out lightly. Whereas everyone else is born that way, I said in understanding. How do you know he's turning more people? There is a striking amount of missing person cases recently in the downtown area, Victor said, after reviewing the CCTV footage of all of the attacks. A large majority of the betas are those missing persons. Shit, I trailed off. The attack today also proved he's turned people within the last 2 days, Susan said with a severe look on her face. He's growing his pack rapidly, Joshua. Not to mention he's spreading his anti-drug propaganda like a plague, Victor grumbled. His influence is slowly starting to affect our profits. Slowly but surely. God damn it, I hissed. As if he could become more of a pain in our asses. We need to neutralize him as a threat before it gets any worse, Josh, Susan said in a motherly tone. We already have the lost stock to deal with, and more if he continues his attacks. Losing customers will only be the final nail in the coffin. We have a lead, I said firmly. There was a beta who got away. We know where she works. Maybe she could give us some insight. That's good, Josh. The old chairman nodded. But you have to consider the risks of confronting one of Drake's pack. She works in a coffee shop. I doubt she's gonna have the balls to do something reckless in public, I said with a shrug. Besides, Drake abandoned her and left her for dead. She might be more willing to talk. She also might purposefully mislead you, Lexi countered. I guess I'll find out, I said. But it's worth a shot. She's the only lead we have. And if I were in her position and my alpha left me for dead, I wouldn't think twice about betraying him. It is possible for a wolf to leave their pack, Victor mused. But it is only done through great willpower and strength. The strength she may not have if she fought today. It's worth a shot, I repeated myself. I'll go tomorrow. I doubt she's gonna head straight back to work. Unlike some people. Speaking of, maybe it's best you take the rest of the day off, the chairman suggested. I think you've earned that much after today. Yeah, I don't think any of my colleagues will want to see me drenched in beta blood, I said dryly. Keep me updated if anything else happens. Of course, sir. Victor nodded. And I would like to extend my personal apology for not informing you of the attack sooner. We were unsure if you would be able to handle it. But you have proven to us yet again that you are more than capable. I'm glad, I chuckled. Otherwise, I'd be a pretty bad werewolf CEO. I don't think that's possible, Josh, Susan said with a kind smile. Not from what we've seen. Thanks, I said. I appreciate it. Take care, sir, the chairman said as I stood from my seat and headed for the door. You too. I waved as I left the office and headed for the elevator. I decided to just give Mia a call and let her know I was going home early. The feeling of my clothes sticking to my skin was driving me insane, and my wound was starting to chafe on the fabric of my suit. My assistant was understanding and said she'd see me tomorrow anyway. I felt a little bad for just leaving her at work while I got to go home, but she seemed pretty chill about the whole thing now that she'd had a chance to clean herself up. So I headed down to the underground parking lot and sent Roland a text asking if he was free. The driver pulled up within a minute, and his car was now free of injured security guards. Hey man, I greeted him as I slid into the passenger seat. How are the guards? They're being treated, he reassured me. And they'll make it. Thanks to you, sir. And Mia, I added. She's the one who found them. You two make a good team, he commented as he started to pull out of the parking lot. If it's not too bold of me to say, you two remind me of your mother and father. I smiled at the thought. My parents had been together since they'd met in college, and they'd been the definition of a power couple. They'd built Lunar Corp from the ground up and done it all themselves. I don't think that's too bold of you, I said. And I appreciate that. Speaking of your parents, where would you like me to drop you off tonight, sir? The driver asked. Since there were no regular clothes that fit me at my own apartment, I decided to make the jump and just head back to my parents' place on my own. Now that I knew me and my dad were the same size after my shift, it was the most sensible thing to do rather than try and squeeze myself into clothes way too small for me. My parents' apartment, please, I said with a deep exhale. Very well, sir. Roland drove me in silence and didn't mention anything else about the fight earlier or his eagerness to help, so I took the quiet time as a chance to prepare myself. Without Mia, it was probably going to be a lot harder, but at least I had time to actually take a moment to center myself. I also noticed Roland took the long way to the apartment complex. I didn't know if he did it purposefully or not, but something told me he could sense my unease. As we pulled up to the huge crystal white building, I took one last deep breath before opening my car door. Thanks for the ride, Roland, I said as I patted my driver on the shoulder and stepped out of the car. Shall I pick you up from here in the morning, sir? He asked. I furrowed my brow in thought. Could I stomach sleeping here another night? And without my assistant? I'd only really thought as far as getting new clothes and getting the hell out of there for a well-deserved drink, not whether or not I'd be able to sleep in their bed. I'll let you know, I said and shut the door behind me. Roland held his hand up at me as he drove away, which left me standing alone on the curb with nothing but my thoughts. But I wasn't gonna let it get to me this time. I knew what to expect, and I'd already spent the night in that place. So I pulled myself together and strode into the reception like I owned the place, and then I hopped into the elevator, put in my key, and kept my head held high. My hands were steady as I put the key into the front door, and as I pushed it open and was greeted with the remnants of my parents, I didn't panic. I wasn't gonna let it overwhelm me. Today I had fought off a dozen betas like it was nothing. Spending a couple of minutes in my parents' apartment was a piece of cake. I kicked the door shut with my foot and headed for my parents' en-suite. Then I peeled off my sticky clothes and tried my best to neatly fold them, but the blood had started to congeal and made the fabric firm and hard to bend. Getting in the shower felt like heaven though, and I sighed as all of the gore started to wash off my body. All of my parents' shower gels and shampoos were still here, half full and open, so I picked up an expensive mint-scented shower gel to scrub the stubborn gunk still stuck to my body. Then I used a coconutty one to wash the grime out of my hair. As soon as I was out of the shower and dried, I beelined for my dad's dresser. I had no idea what sort of downtime clothes he had, considering I never saw him wear any these past few years. He was always in his work clothes because for him the work was never done. Had no idea when I'd get to that point, or if I even wanted to. I liked having a life outside of work. Admittedly, it hadn't felt that way for a long time, but I really felt like now that I had the money and freedom to do whatever I wanted, I should take advantage of it. Tonight was as good a night as any to start doing that, so I grabbed my phone off the dresser and picked the perfect person to help me start enjoying my new freedom. The line rang for a few seconds before a groggy voice picked up. "Hello. Matt, where are you at, bud?" I asked as I pressed the phone to my ear with my shoulder while I sifted through my dad's dresser. "I'm at home with the matriarch herself, wishing I was never born," my best friend said dryly. "Why? What's up? Do you want that rain check now?" I smirked, since I already knew what his answer was gonna be. "Yes." I heard Matt scramble up and fall over something. "Yes, God please." "I thought as much," I laughed. "Meet me at Josie's. I am in dire need of a drink." "You and me both, brother," Matt joked. "I'll meet you there in 20. "Sounds good to me," I said. "See you in 20. I put my phone back down on the dresser so I could actually concentrate on what I was looking at rather than just seeing black and gray fabric. In the end, I pulled out a pair of black jeans that didn't look like they'd cut off my circulation, unlike the ones back at my place, and then a simple gray cotton shirt. Considering I had no deodorant or anything here, I decided to use my dad's cologne that he'd left out on his dresser. The scent was 100 times stronger than it was when I was just a regular human, and I coughed as it hit my throat. How the hell he wore this every day was beyond me, but I guess it was better than smelling like B.O. and Josie's. I took a quick look in the mirror to make sure I looked good, and I didn't think I'd ever get used to how much more good-looking I was after my shift. My jawline was sharp, and my eyes were more hooded, making them look like hunter eyes. I was a catch, like an actual catch. Before I'd been sorta plain-looking, blended into the crowd, and dating online and in the real world was basically impossible. But now I had the world at my fingertips. I headed out after one last look in the mirror, and I locked the door to my parents' apartment behind me without a second thought. That was another huge step I'd managed, and honestly I was kinda proud. And I knew the next time I came here it would be even easier. Like water off a duck's back. I hailed a cab as I stepped out onto the main street, since I didn't really want to call Roland all the way out here again, and I got the cab driver to drop me off right outside Josie's. Matt and I used to come here all the time during college, mostly because Matt stuck with me like a limpet, but it had become our usual haunt and a great place to drink booze and forget about the rest of the world. I could hear the chatter and music coming from inside the bar about a mile off, and I smiled to myself as I stepped into the dimly lit room and was greeted by Dean, one of the bartenders who'd been working here longer than I'd even been alive. He was a scruffy-looking guy with a bushy salt and pepper beard and thick black eyebrows. His eyes were kinda sunken in, but they were warm, friendly, and were a deep chocolate brown. If Dean wasn't wearing a flannel, then something was wrong, but thankfully he was wearing his usual red and black one today. I could smell the sweat on his person from working long shifts and the alcohol on his hands as I approached the bar, and I gave him a warm smile in greeting. "Joshua St. James, by God, boy," he said as his eyes widened in disbelief. "You look incredible." "Thanks, man." I grinned as I slapped a 20 on the counter. "I've been working out a lot." It looks like it, he chuckled. God, I almost can't believe it. Yeah, me neither, I joked with a half-hearted laugh. If he only knew why I'd suddenly bulked up. Dean was good at reading people, and I could see him squint his eyes at my response, but then he shook his head as if deciding it wasn't worth the hassle. You want the usual? He asked as he wiped his hands with a rag before slinging it over his shoulder. Nah, I think I'll have a whiskey, I said. On the rocks. One whiskey coming up, Dean said with a grin. The bartender pulled a glass out from under the bar before dunking 2 cubes of ice into it. Then he pulled a bottle of Tennessee whiskey off the shelf and poured at least a double in there for me. Here you go, kid, he said as he placed the glass on a coaster in front of me. On the house. No way, Dean. I shook my head. Let me pay. It's on the house, the scruffy bartender repeated himself with a cocked eyebrow. You were never the type to turn down free drinks, Josh. That was before I inherited my parents' business, Dean, I said with a sad smile. And that's exactly why this is on the house, he said with a sympathetic look. Take it, please. All right, I sighed and grabbed the glass. But I'm leaving you a big tip. Ah, now that I won't be opposed to, Dean said with a hearty laugh before he shuffled off to serve another customer. I took a long swig of my whiskey and winced a little at the fire. My sense of taste must have been enhanced too because all of the undertones hit me like a ton of bricks. Vanilla, toasted nuts, and something super smoky coated my tongue like a weighted blanket. Joshua St. James necking back whiskey? Matt's voice called out from the entrance, and I turned in my stool to face him. I thought those days were behind you. Back in college. Matt was wearing khaki shorts and another Hawaiian shirt, which was black with white flowers on it this time. The traveler's lifestyle must have really rubbed off on him if it affected his style, since it used to consist of band tees and ripped skinny jeans. I've reacquired my acquired taste. I smirked. Reacquired is a strong word for it. My best friend scoffed and hopped on the stool beside mine. You downed 1 bottle, threw up, and then never touched the stuff again. Like I said, I've reacquired my acquired taste, I said. And I won't be throwing it back up this time. Well, in that case I might join you, the curly-haired human said and knocked on the sticky wood of the bar. I'll have whatever he's got, Dino. Coming right up, Matty, Dean called back. I'll be with you in a few. So, how come you need a bit of liquor in you? Is the CEO life already that taxing? Matt asked teasingly. It's been a bit of a rough day, I admitted. I needed to take the edge off. A little. Well, you know me, I am always ready to take the edge off, especially living with Sally, he grumbled. One event? Or is it something my little non-corporate pea-brain won't be able to comprehend? No, it's just we're losing profit and there's been some security issues, I said as I leaned my elbows on the bar. Not a great thing to jump into. Jesus Christ, Jay, what did you do to your arm? Matt gasped as he grabbed hold of my wrist. I had completely forgotten about the wound the beta had given me during the fight. I looked down at my forearm to see that it had scabbed over, and the skin had already started to fuse back together. And I'd wager that come the morning it would be fully healed. Oh, I had a little accident with the machinery when I was checking out the manufacturing down at the warehouse, I quickly lied. Hurt like a bitch. Bullshit, Matt scoffed. You're telling me you did that today? Yeah. I shrugged. Guess I'm a fast healer. Don't lie to me, man, the black-haired human groaned. That shit doesn't look like a fresh wound, and definitely doesn't look like it was done by a machine. It was. I protested. Oh yeah? What machine? Matt asked with a raised eyebrow. It was. Shit. I'd never actually looked at what went into producing the pills, so I had no fucking clue what any of it was called. Go on, my friend urged. I'm waiting, Joshua. I don't know the name of it, Matty, I defended. Just drop it, okay? I'm fine, and so is the machine. You don't know the name of the machine that almost tore your arm off despite the fact you purposefully went there to see how it worked. He quipped with an unimpressed look on his face. Did someone do that to you? I'm fine, Matt, I said as convincingly as I could. Really? You know I have connections, he mumbled to me, and I couldn't help but laugh. Your cousin only thinks he's a mafia boss, but there's a bit of a difference, I joked. Why are you acting all weird? Matt asked with a defeated sigh. I'm your best bro. You know you can tell me anything. He was right. He was my best friend, and I knew I could trust him with anything. But what would happen if I told him the truth? Would his life be put at risk? Would it put a target on his back? I didn't know if it was worth the risk, but then again it was like he said. He was my best friend, the only one I'd had for pretty much my whole life. We'd grown up together, and we'd never kept anything from each other. And I knew if Matt was in my position, then he would tell me the truth. Hello? Earth to Josh. Matt waved his hand in front of my spaced-out face, and I quickly snapped back to reality. What's going on? Look, you aren't gonna believe me, I said with a sigh. But there's a reason I've changed. Like, physically changed. So it wasn't just you getting rid of your grief by bench-pressing trucks? The loudly dressed human said in a sarcastic tone. No, it wasn't, I said seriously, and Matt's face fell a little. What I'm about to tell you is crazy. Nuts. Shouldn't even be possible. Okay, Josh, you're kinda scaring me now, Matt chuckled nervously. I quickly surveyed the room to make sure no one was listening in. Luckily, the bar wasn't too packed and the patrons were too busy talking or lost in their drinks to give two shits about what we were talking about. So I took the plunge. Matt, I'm a werewolf, I deadpanned. There was no use sugarcoating it. It already sounded like a load of crap, so I figured it was best just to come out and say it. You're, my friend blinked and spluttered out a laugh. You're a werewolf? Yes, I said quietly. Don't say it so loud. Josh. Matt struggled to get words out through his laughter. I think the whiskey has gone to your head there, because you're telling me you're a werewolf. Keep it down, I growled, and I watched as Matt paled a little at my tone. You're being serious? He asked as his eyes roamed over my face. You're not pulling my leg? No, I'm not, I sighed. My parents were werewolves too, okay? They kept it from me my whole life to keep me safe. Lunar Corporation isn't just a regular pharmaceutical company. We make drugs for werewolves. Josh, I think I'm gonna take you home now, Matt said in a concerned tone. This must be the grief, or your wound is infected or something. Look. I slammed my hand down onto the bar. I felt my claws start to push through where my fingernails were, and Matt's blue eyes bulged in surprise. I'm not lying to you, I said and flashed him my fangs. Your eyes. He trailed off as his mouth hung open. Josh, they're red. Yeah, it's because I'm a werewolf, I explained and forced myself to shift back. I didn't want to go full alpha in Josie's of all places. I just needed to show him enough to convince him I wasn't bullshitting him. You're not kidding, Matt said as realization swept over his face. Holy Jesus Christ, man, this is insane. I know it is, I muttered and glanced around to make sure no one else was paying us any attention. But I need you to promise me that you won't tell anyone. It could put your life in danger, and I don't want anything to happen to you just because I told you. Cross my heart and hope to not die, my best friend immediately said and made a crossing motion on his chest. You know I won't tell anyone, Jay. All right. My shoulders sagged in relief. That's good. You've got to tell me more though, man, Matt said as an excited grin replaced the shock on his face. Tell me everything. Tell me how you got that wound. You really want to hear it? I asked with a lopsided smirk. Of course I fucking do, Jay. He laughed in disbelief. My best friend is a werewolf. That's not something you hear every day. All right, but you better buckle up, I said before taking another swig of my drink. Here's your whiskey, Matty, Dean said as he came over and placed Matt's in front of him. Hey Dean, open up a tab for me, Matt said with a smirk. We're gonna be here a while. We sat at Josie's for at least 2 hours while I explained everything to my best friend. And in between that time we'd both had about 8 whiskeys. My tolerance must have improved after my shift because I barely felt a thing. Matt, on the other hand, was barely sitting upright. I called it quits after our 9th glass, and I hauled my friend up and into a taxi after saying goodbye to Dean. Matt had managed to slur out something along the lines of being the best secret keeper in all of New York City. And drunk or not, I knew he'd keep to his word. After I knew he was on his way back to his mother's house, I had to decide where I was going to stay the night, between my shoddy apartment that had no clothes that fit me in, and my parents' amazing penthouse that had everything I needed in. I knew what was the right decision. I'd already spent the night once and done the hardest thing with my beautiful assistant at my side. But I didn't need her to be there anymore. I was the goddamn supreme alpha and the owner of a multi-billion-dollar company. So I stopped overthinking it, hopped in a taxi and told him my parents' address. I didn't need to fake my confidence this time. It was starting to feel natural, which was one hell of a good sign. When I got into the penthouse, I got out of my dad's clothes and found some of his pajamas. Then I brushed my teeth with a spare toothbrush I found in their bathroom cabinet and climbed into their plush king-sized bed. I set my alarm for early the next morning so I'd have time to get ready and figure out how I was going to approach the Emily situation. And I was just about to go to sleep when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from Mia. "Hey, just checking in. Everything okay?" The text read. I smiled at how she'd wanted to check up on me, and I could hardly reply fast enough. "All good here. What about you?" I waited for a few moments for her to respond, and I felt like a school kid with a crush as I jumped when her message came through. "All good here too, boss. Do you want me to meet you at your apartment tomorrow morning? Then we can head to the coffee shop together." The 3 dots popped up signaling she was still typing, so I waited again. "I'm officially making myself your designated backup." I laughed out loud at her message, and I couldn't wipe the grin off my face as I typed back, "Well, my designated backup is more than welcome to meet me at my parents' apartment tomorrow morning." "You're at your parents'?" She responded quickly. "I'm proud of you," in a non-condescending way. "Haha, thanks," I typed back. "I'll see you in the morning?" "See you in the morning, Josh X." I just knew I had a shit-eating grin on my face, even when I put my phone down and started to fall asleep. I think I could get used to Chapter 9. I woke up at 7 in the morning to give myself enough time to shower and dress. Then I picked out an all-black suit from my father's wardrobe for today. Felt like it was intimidating enough for when we confronted Emily in the coffee shop, but it also made me look fine as hell. Mia arrived at 8 on the dot, and when she knocked I was halfway through downing a black coffee since the fridge was still barren and empty. When I opened the front door, I couldn't help but check my assistant out. She was wearing cream-colored slacks and a loose white blouse that was tucked in, as well as a coral pink blazer on top. On her feet she wore matching coral pink stiletto heels. Her hair was in a half-up half-down style and exposed her neck, which allowed me to see the necklace I had bought her. "Good morning." I greeted her pretty enthusiastically, considering it was still early in the morning. I'd never been a morning person, mostly because I usually worked all day and most of the night back at my old job, so come the morning I was just exhausted and hated life. Now though, I had energy as soon as I opened my eyes in the morning, and that was saying something considering what I did yesterday. I didn't really need the caffeine from the coffee I was drinking, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to have some extra energy stored away in case things with Emily went sour. "Good morning to you too," Mia said with a surprised chuckle. "You look good. You're really going for that dark and mysterious bachelor vibe." "Huh. You know me," I joked as I headed back into the kitchen. "You want a coffee?" "No thanks, I already had one at home," the blonde said as she shut the door behind her and followed me into the apartment. "How did you find sleeping here last night?" "Honestly, I think I'm getting used to it," I admitted as I rinsed my coffee cup in the sink. "It sure as hell beats going back to my shitty apartment." "I suppose this is a pretty big upgrade for anyone," the blonde giggled. "I'm glad you're finding it easier. This is a huge step." "Yeah," I said with a proud smile. "Yeah, it is. Besides, I kinda need my dad's clothes until that shipment arrives." "Well, you know, I could always get them sent here," Mia suggested tentatively. "If you wanted them to be, of course. If you want to still stay at your place, then I won't change the address." I thought about it for a moment. It was a pretty big life decision after all. I was planning on moving out of my shit apartment anyway since I had the cash to do it, but would there be any point in spending that money when this amazing penthouse was left to me? Selling it was out of the question. This was my parents' home and I didn't want to pawn it off to another rich bastard. All of the memories in this place, as painful as they might be to think about, were still memories of them, and I couldn't let that go. Plus, Matt needed a place to stay so he could get away from his mom, and if I officially moved out of my apartment into here, he could snag up my old place as soon as possible. There was nothing for me back there. If anything, staying in that place was more depressing than staying here, because that apartment had become my pit of despair. A place I had let myself go. A place that quite literally didn't fit me anymore. Send them here, I said as I trusted my gut. I think it's about time I pull my head out of my ass. Your head isn't in your ass, Mia mock scolded me. You've been grieving, Josh, and this is a huge step. A step your parents wanted you to take when you were ready. You're right, I said and nodded in agreement. As always. And don't you ever forget it. The blonde Omega winked. Now come on. We've got a barista to go interrogate. Mia hooked her arm through mine and led us out of the apartment, which I swiftly locked. Then we headed into the elevator and out of the complex. Together. It was a pretty nice day, so we decided we'd walk to the coffee shop to enjoy the breeze. Plus it gave us more time to just talk, which was something I definitely had no complaints about. Hey, what are you doing this weekend? I asked as we started to head down the street. I'm actually going hiking this weekend, she said with an eager smile that was incredibly endearing. It's one of my favorite hobbies. Sad, I know. I don't think that's sad, I said. Maybe a little on the nose for a werewolf. Haha. She playfully rolled her eyes. I just love being outside in the wild. Which, now that you say that, actually is a little on the nose. Which isn't a bad thing, I said with a grin. Do you go on your own? Yeah, the blonde Omega said, and I felt my heart drop. I don't have any friends willing to get their shoes dirty. She was going out into the wild on her own while Drake's pack was running rampant. I could feel my protective instincts start to take over, and it felt like my throat was being squeezed. There was no way I could let her go out there all alone without any protection. Capable or not, she was still an Omega going out without backup. And even if she wasn't expecting any trouble, the risk was still there. I didn't know if she had stopped taking her scent suppressants or not, but her smell was becoming more and more alluring with each day. And I knew if I could smell it, then other wolves would be able to smell it too. If anything happened to her out there, and I knew I could have done something. I didn't know if I could actually live with myself. I didn't want to become the thing she was scared of me becoming. A tyrant like Drake who only saw her as an object that was weak and submissive. But I still felt a sense of duty to protect her. Do you? I quickly cleared my throat. Do you want some company? You want to come with me? She asked as she looked up at me in surprise. I mean, if that's too weird as your boss. No, it's not weird, the Omega giggled. It would be nice to spend some time together outside of work. Yeah, it would be, I agreed with a relieved smile. And tracking down rogue werewolves like Emily. Which, as great of a bonding experience as it is, it would be nice to do. Something a little bit normal, she joked. As long as you don't mind walking around for hours on end. I think I can handle it, I said and nudged Mia's shoulder with my own. I was relieved she'd agreed to let me come, and I was actually really looking forward to spending time with her outside of work. At least with me being there, I could keep an eye on her and make sure assholes like Drake didn't try and pull something just to get to me. We arrived at the coffee shop shortly after our conversation ended, and I took a deep breath before pushing open the door. I prayed to God Emily was working today, otherwise we'd have no lead to chase. In order to get to Drake, sure, I could try and follow her scent like I did with the other wolf I let go, but I didn't know how far I would be able to track it. Tracking Drake's scent felt a little too risky, and he was the type to preempt me following it. I wouldn't be surprised if he'd purposefully run circles to throw me off, so Emily was our best shot. The scent of coffee overpowered my nose as we stepped into the cafe. It wasn't too busy this morning, which was surprising, but that meant we'd have fewer eyes on us if anything went wrong. I sniffed the air deeply, and I immediately picked up on Emily's scent. It was sort of diluted because of all the other smells in the shop, but it was there. My eyes followed the scent trail instinctively, and both Mia and I were shocked to see the barista serving a table in the far corner of the room. She looked roughed up from the fight yesterday and walked with a limp. Her hair was pulled back out of her bruised and cut face in a small ponytail, and she wore a black long-sleeved shirt under her work uniform. When the cherry-haired beta turned around from the table she was serving, she almost dropped the tray in her hands as she spotted us. Her blue eyes were wide, and I could smell the fear coming from her like it was perfume. I subtly held my hands up in front of me and tipped my head to the register. The beta swallowed hard and reluctantly limped her way over to behind the counter. What do you want? She asked in a trembling voice as Mia and I approached. The beta kept her gaze lowered and stared at the counter rather than us, and now that we were closer, I could see she had a busted lip and a black eye. She was tense as if expecting a fight, so I ducked down a little until her eyes snapped up to mine. "We're not here to hurt you," I said. "We just want to talk." "I don't want to talk," she said dismissively. "I'm working." "So when's your next break?" I asked, and I fought back a smile as she scowled up at me. 10 minutes, the blue-eyed beta muttered. "Well, I'd love to buy you a coffee to talk over," I said. "How's that sound?" "It sounds like I'm walking into a trap," she deadpanned. "You're not, you have my word," I reassured her. "Please, we're only here to talk." The barista stared at me for a long moment, but the smell of her fear started to dissipate slightly. "Fine," Emily said with a defeated sigh. "Wait in the corner in front of the window." "Sure thing," I said with a nod. "See you in 10. "Okay." The cherry-haired beta averted her eyes as we headed for the table by the window, and I could hear her begrudgingly serve another customer who was waiting behind us. Mia sat down in the plush chaise seat with a sigh and rested her chin on her hand. "So, how well do you think this is going to go?" the blonde asked. "I'm holding out hope." I shrugged. "I think she will come around." "Think?" the Omega said humorously. "She's still pretty cold." "Can you blame her?" I asked the Omega. "She must be scared shitless." "True," Mia sighed. "I can't believe she's back at work like nothing happened." "It sorta puts it into perspective, doesn't it?" I said. "1 minute we're living a normal life, working a 9-to-5 job, the next we're fighting each other to the death like rabid dogs. It's better than how it used to be in the old days," the blonde explained. "Werewolves were just rabid beasts back then. They had no control or humanity, and were hardly ever in their human form." "So when did we start living normal lives?" I asked. "It was a slow progression," Mia said as she cocked her head. "It started out with a few rebels wanting more from their lives than just ravaging livestock and living in the woods. They started spending more time in their human form until it became more natural to them. Then they passed that way of life on to their children, and so on and so forth." "So, all the scary stories about us were actually real at one point?" I asked. "Pretty much," the Omega sighed. "With the invention of modern medicine, werewolves found it easier than ever to live a normal human life. Those who weren't as strong-willed could take a pill and not have to do anything else. That's why companies like Lunar Corporation are so important. Our people have gotten used to the easy way out. If drug production were to stop and they no longer had access to the meds, the world would descend into chaos, just like in the old days. And that's exactly why we need Emily on our side," I said as I readjusted myself on the uncomfortable bar stool I was sitting on. "So we can find Drake and stop his indoctrination," Mia finished with a sigh. "This is gonna be tough, Josh. There's no way to know how many other packs he's managed to convince." "We'll deal with that issue after Drake," I said. "He's the priority. Everything else will have to wait." "Sir, yes, sir." The blonde saluted jokingly before her face grew serious. "She's coming." I turned just in time to see Emily limping over to our table. She sat down on the other bar stool opposite me and folded her arms in a protective way across her chest. "What do you want from me?" she asked bluntly. "That's one way to start a conversation," I said with a weak laugh in an attempt to lighten the mood. "How about I introduce myself? I'm Josh St. James. This is my executive assistant, Mia." "I know who you are," the beta snapped. "I want to know why you're here." "We're here because your alpha is trying to bring my company down to the ground," I replied a little more sharply than I intended, and I took a deep breath to calm myself. "If he carries on like this, we won't be able to produce pharmaceuticals for werewolves for much longer," Mia explained. "I don't take your drugs, so why the hell should I care?" Emily scoffed. "You do realize we're not the bad guys, right?" I asked as I tried to find a new angle to approach her from. "We're trying to help people." "I don't care about your drugs, Josh," Emily said with a roll of her eyes. "I just do what I'm told." "But you should care," I urged. "Our drugs help werewolves live normal lives. Omegas actually have a shot at being respected." "He's right," Mia chimed in with a sad smile. "If I couldn't take scent suppressants, I'd have never made it anywhere, and my life would be at risk." "I already told you I don't care what you do," Emily repeated herself in a cool voice. "It's Drake who has a problem with your drugs, not me." Then why are you still so hellbent on protecting him? I asked. That son of a bitch left me out there to hang, Emily scoffed. My allegiance to him isn't what's in question here. And I sure as hell am not gonna protect him if I can help it. He can rot for all I care. So help us, I pleaded. Help us put a stop to all the pain and destruction he's causing. Emily, he's not going to stop, Mia added. You're the only wolf we know that can help us. Emily was quiet for a few moments as she chewed on her busted lip. She was weighing something up, and I felt like I could hear the cogs turning in her head. You let Kirsty go, the redhead muttered. And then you let me go. Kirsty? Is that the beta with the blonde hair? I asked as I started to put the pieces together. You tracked her sent back here because she was my friend, the beta explained. And she had nowhere else to go. She was scared for her life. She thought you were going to come back here and finish the job. But when you walked through those doors and just ordered a coffee, she knew you were different. I'm sorry I had to do what I did to the other betas, I said. But I had no choice. She knew that. Emily nodded with a sad look in her eye. Most of us don't want to follow his orders, Josh. But we don't have a choice either. You said she knew Josh was different, the blonde Omega pointed out. Why? Are you speaking about her like she's not here anymore? Because she's not, Emily snapped before she quickly composed herself. Drake killed her. He thought she was a coward. After you let her go and after she came back here, Drake called a pack meeting. He called her out for her cowardice and had the newest betas tear her apart. Jesus Christ. I trailed off in disgust. Emily, I'm so sorry. He's planning an attack on a few shipment trucks due to come in next Monday, she said bluntly as she quickly wiped a few tears from her eyes. If you want him, that's where he'll be. That's great, Emily, I said as I blinked in surprise. Thank you. Don't thank me. She shook her head. If he finds out I told you, he'll tear me apart too. I won't let that happen, I said firmly. You have my word. I appreciate the sentiment, Josh, but there's nothing you can do if that happens. She shrugged and then winced when it seemed to hurt her. An alpha's orders aren't something we can go against, which means I'll have to let myself be torn to shreds. Why can't you just leave? I asked with a frown. Just cut and run before it's too late. Do you think if it was that simple all those missing people wouldn't already be going back to their families? She scoffed. I'm one of the lucky ones. Because I still get to live a life. I still have my job, I still see my family. But the ones he plucked out of their beds, the ones he keeps at his side at all times, they can never go back. What would happen if I killed Drake? I asked. Would they be free? To some extent, the cherry-haired beta said with an uncomfortable shuffle. If you kill an alpha of a pack, the winning alpha would have the choice of either forcing or welcoming the members of the losing side into his own pack. You could also let them go, but that isn't very common in our world. But don't think you'd want some of his pack in yours. How come? I frowned. There are betas who were forced into submission and allegiance, sure, but there are some who willingly chose to join Drake, Emily explained with a sigh. They're just as bad as him. They have the same disgusting ideals about hierarchy, and they have no regard for humans or anything less than alpha lives. So, if it came down to it, you're saying pick carefully, I said in understanding. If it came down to it, the beta nodded. But I wouldn't get your hopes up. Alphas have tried to take down Drake before, and it didn't go well for them. Have other alphas done what I did yesterday? I questioned. Emily went still, and her face was stoic as she played with her hands in her lap. You should be careful, she warned me without answering my question. Don't underestimate him. And don't think just because you won yesterday it means it's gonna be an easy fight next time. He's riled up. He's pissed. He almost didn't let me leave last night. Not without giving me a few bruises first, at least. He did that to you? I growled instinctively. Emily's blue eyes widened in surprise at my response, and I could suddenly smell arousal on her. She shuffled in her seat and crossed her legs before clearing her throat. A reminder, she said. That next time I get trapped like that, I'll end up like Kirsty. That motherfucker. I swore under my breath. How anyone could be a leader of a pack and willingly choose to treat his people like that was beyond me. It made me sick to my stomach. And I knew when I had my own pack. Whenever that might be, I wouldn't lift a finger against them. Especially not to make an example out of them for something they couldn't even help. I have to go back to work, the beta said as she stood from her seat. That's all the information I can give you. Wait, can I get your number? I asked before she could walk away. Emily turned around in surprise and raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow at me. You want my number? She asked as if she thought I was joking. Yeah. I shrugged. It wouldn't hurt to keep in contact, right? If you feel like you have more to share. Or if you ever need help with assholes like Drake, I'll only be a call away. Aren't you just the smooth talker? Emily scoffed, but I thought I saw her lips twitch upward at the corners. All right, Josh. I'll give you my number. I didn't even realize she was being serious until she pulled out a notepad from her apron along with a pen and quickly scribbled down her number. Don't make me regret this, she warned, but her voice lacked the usual hostility. I mean it. I won't, I said coolly with a smirk. Thanks, Emily. Whatever, the beta sighed dramatically, but she couldn't hide her smile as she turned and headed for the cash register. Holy shit, she had actually given me her number. I turned to Mia in disbelief, and the Omega smirked knowingly at me. Well, Joshy, it would seem you're already working that alpha charm, she cooed. How does it feel? It feels good. I smirked. Really fucking good.